The war for AI talent is the biggest thing on everyone's mind.
Engineers versus marketers versus salespeople will have different language that they're going to react to.
The gap between the B2B playbook and the B2C playbook is closing.
What a data tells a story that's gotta be told. It's the art and the science, getting the numbers right.
Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Brandformance. Today, we are going to be talking to Samyutha Reddy. Samyutha is a brand comms and AI marketing leader who advises startups and scaled companies on how to shape their AI narrative for today's age. Samyutha led enterprise marketing and growth for Jasper AI, which was at the pinnacle and the center of the AI boom that happened between 2022 and 2024. So she has a unique perspective on this exact topic. So let's dive in. Samyutha, all right, this is going to be fun. We have interacted a bunch on LinkedIn and DMs, but we actually haven't spoken live, like face to face. So this is going to be a fun one.
I think the fun part about knowing you on LinkedIn is I have this caricature of who you are and your personality, and now I get to poke and prod and see which parts of it are true.
Hopefully, I will deliver on the promise and the image that I have built up. Social media is so weird, right? It's like sometimes I do feel like it's not all real. Like, do I feel good about posting on LinkedIn every day? And then I realize, hey, gotta grow the business. That's what you have to do. That's the game, and let's do it to the best of our ability. You
I
know?
hear you totally. I think being an entrepreneur and sort of starting my own consultancy, I get to criticize CEOs and founders a lot. I get to poke and prod them about being live on social media. And I think being in those shoes myself has given me such empathy because you're right, it's such a vulnerable place to be, especially when you're counting on business outcomes and reputation as sort of a byproduct of being really visible on social media.
Okay, I'm so excited about this podcast because you are one of those unique people who had a front row seat into AI between 22 and 24. Right? So you did you lead all marketing at Jasper? Like what was your role like? Let's talk about that because that must have been just a
Yeah.
crazy time. Like I remember those times.
Insane. It was one of the best experiences of my career. I started at Jasper right before they raised their Series A. I kind of came on as the head of enterprise marketing and comms. At the time, Jasper was a consumer business, right? So they had built a
Mm.
really good consumer base around sort of like freelancers and small agencies and mom and pop shops that were using this sort of brand new generative AI technology to create blogs and figure out their content strategy. And I came in because I was so excited to work for a MarTech product because it was a community I knew and I had experience on the enterprise side. And I really wanted to get a view into what it was like to work at this like insanely fast growing consumer business. And so I led product marketing, comms, and growth for a while. I think in that role, it was really, really interesting because I had just come from a public company. It was called WalkMe that I worked at before that. So I think going all the way back to kind of like the very beginning of, building messaging from scratch was such a great experience for me. And you're right, that time in which I was in
Yeah.
marketing was really special because there was no precedent. There was no, hey, we've seen this playbook before and now let's adapt it for this new tool that's trying to do something different in the industry. And so a lot of it was user education. It was a different type of marketing, but it's I certainly feel very privileged to have had that experience.
And if I remember correctly, Jasper was a thing before ChatGPT. Am I right?
Yeah, this journey was really special because you sort of started off as being category king and being all encompassing. Jasper was almost synonymous with sort of like the
Yep.
Silicon Valley darlings and who was getting funding. And I think with kind of the general purpose consumer tools coming out and becoming a household name so quickly, it was a really interesting sort of like a business exercise in, okay, now you can't compete with free. So how do you really do a complete pivot into the enterprise? And now all of those messaging pillars I was building around like behavior shift and how you create content in a new way in marketing, all of a sudden really had to be tweaked towards like security and indemnity clauses and budget lines and things that really had to be pivoted into the enterprise. And so I think part of that is that saying around a rising tide raises all ships. I think it was special for the whole industry to be in sort of this like no one knew what was going
Yeah.
on, and the types of rooms I had been in was really interesting. But I think a part of it was also like a really tough like business pivot on how are we going to completely reorient the business.
Yeah. Okay. We just went straight into your Jasper conversation, and I completely forgot that I'm supposed to ask you a question before we even get going, which is, and I think it's a good one because you have this outside in perspective right now on the industry as you're advising many startups and many AI companies. Is there a brand whose marketing you are jealous of today?
Yeah. So two come to mind right now. I think the first one will be sort of an obvious one, which is Anthropic. I think Anthropic is nailing the comms challenge that we're seeing right now so well. They are quite literally building the playbook on what kind of like new age comms looks like. They have a founder that is super passionate, that is
Mhm.
publishing work under his own name on his own platforms, right? These like sort of like long, serious think pieces around like where AI is going. They have named their challenge really well, right? Like, we are the good guys in AI. We are fighting the good fight around privacy and security and thoughtfulness around how AI is going to be rolled out societally, right? They've named the challenge, and the challenge isn't Anthropic versus OpenAI. It is society versus AI, and how are they going to be a steward, sort of like leading society into this new age of AI. So I think they've just done such a good job of sort of like rallying the team. And I think one thing I'll say throughout my consulting experience, right, regardless of, category, industry, size of company, the war for AI talent is the biggest thing on everyone's mind. And that really
Yeah.
has become a comms challenge. And when you look at Anthropic's messaging, you really see that, I think Meta's giving out like $1 billion packages to AI
Mm,
researchers and developers in that space. And so when packages are that big, like money almost becomes nominal. And there's this saying that, people fight for countries, people enlist for countries, but they fight for generals. And that sort of feels
mm,
like the play here, right? You want to fight for something you believe in. And so I just sort of want to call out that Anthropic has built the playbook. But I also do want to call out, a startup player. I think Clay is doing an incredible job. And I've
yeah.
had my eye on their marketing forever, and I am eternally jealous of sort of like how well they've been able to execute. I think what's coming to mind for Clay is I think they're really building the startup playbook in terms of like just having really real evidence behind everything they're doing. Just
Mm,
this morning, actually, they sort of announced their new ARR milestone, and they also said that, hey, we're allowing employees to sell private stock, which is really rare for privately held startups. You typically are making a big gamble, and you're hoping and praying it'll pay off. And they're basically giving real evidence to this is why you want to work for us. Our product really works. Not only is just the
yeah.
ARR and the narrative, but we're actually providing real evidence that people are making money along this journey. And so I think those two companies really come to mind as like this is what marketing should be. And a lot of that is like a very real functional product and very real functional demand.
Yeah, it's a good one. I mean, Claude, the momentum those guys have just over the holidays. Like I went into, Christmas break being a big like ChatGPT user and fan. And I'd started to kind of see, Gemini, start to take some of my attention. And then coming out of the holiday, I'm like, Claude, Claude, Claude. I saw it everywhere on my feed. It was ridiculous. And
Mhm.
so we just bought a team-wide, plan for Claude because everyone's seeing that and the velocity of shipping their Excel sort of add-on, huge hit, for us as well. So, okay, that's a good one. Tell me a little bit about the type of companies that you are advising right now. And the one question I have is, are there patterns that are emerging between these different companies? And I hate to use the in the age of AI, but like what are people doing that is standing out or is common between some of the leading brands that you are advising or you're working with?
Yeah, absolutely. So I provide communication support, and
Mhm.
I typically specialize in helping companies that are using AI build trust with their users or their consumers. And that typically manifests in two kind of like archetypes of customers. So the first type of client are sort of AI startups, and it almost feels silly to say AI startups. I think I'll just say startups. But I think
Yep.
they're really interesting in that almost all of them are using generative AI and need to just like figure out what their narrative is. This feels like classic comms work. What is your narrative? What is the good fight that you're trying to fight, and why should people kind of come along with you? And then figuring out all of the tactics and the channels to actually disseminate that message. I think a more interesting one for me that I'm really excited about right now, and it's the client that I'm sort of currently working on, is consumer technology companies. And so the archetype of this client is maybe they're a little further along. They have this user base and they have sort of like this technology, right? Right now, I'm working on one of North America's fastest growing dating apps, an incredibly principled company, incredibly brand forward, incredibly successful in the category. And right now, what they're thinking through is, hey, we have this consumer base and we want to introduce all of these generative AI features, but actually, our consumers don't care about AI. They don't even really want technology involved in this like very sensitive, vulnerable category. How do we talk to them about AI? What does our roadmap look like? How do we please our
Mm,
investors, but also make our users comfortable, but then also figure out how to recruit AI talent and be a leading voice here? So there's a couple of different audiences you have to speak to and do so with a lot of clarity. And so that I typically am working directly with CMOs to figure out like what their AI messaging strategy is. But those are sort of like the
mm,
two archetypes of clients. To answer your question around what trends I'm seeing along both of them, one is I think it's a bit of a 2025 thing. I think every single CEO and founder knows that it's important to go direct and build a personal brand and be able to take that message to market in their very own voice.
yeah.
That feels like a commonality between every stage of company. They know that that's true. I think something I am noticing is I still think founders have a little bit of a misconception of press. I think sometimes when I talk to startup founders and they're sort of frustrated around, why is my funding round not being picked up? It is actually more than the other guys, and we actually more made more ARR than our incumbent when they were in our shoes 5 years
Yeah.
ago. And I think there's still this misconception that comms is somehow related to effort or even reporter relationships. And I think I'll get in hot water for saying this with all of my comms community, but I was on the line with the VP of comms at tech comms at Microsoft, an incredible, incredible mentor and leader who's been at basically all of the big tech companies leading tech comms. We actually have a lot of agreement around what we're seeing, right? At the very top and even at this like very exciting sort of like
Mm,
grassroots startup phase where media relations itself, the fact that you can pick up a reporter and they're going to cover you because you own the relationship is sort of a dying art. Everything is really centering around substance. And it's why I bring up that Clay example, right? It's 100 million ARR is incredible, right? 5 years ago, that would made every,
mm,
publication and reporter call you back. But startups are doing incredible, revenue
mm.
and fundraising. What is the substance you can provide? What is sort of like the full, like in tennis terms, like how do you follow through with the swing the whole way? And so the folks that can do that at kind of like every level are the ones that are earning coverage and earning kind of like, share of voice.
Yeah, there's an interesting sort of parallel to fundraising and
Mhm.
comms. This is my third startup, but like the first like real startup that I'm doing. And I've had to learn a lot about fundraising. There's a certain amount of gamesmanship that's involved. And I feel like the same thing is true for media relations or getting press coverage. There's a certain amount of gamesmanship that's involved. And yes, it's built on substance, but you have to really study the process. And what I realize is it takes time. You can't just like, oh, we're fundraising and we, raised our round and we're going to like somehow get coverage. No, it's like, what's in it for the person who is covering that, you know, announcement? What did they care about? What is their unique perspective and angle on the industry or the trend or whatever the story is? And what is the story that is worth breaking, because we all live in the world of the 6-second reels, and you have to find something that's going to break through all of that noise. And we don't pay enough attention to it. And like you said, it's a little bit of a dying art. But I actually think that if you know how to do this, press and PR can still be very, very powerful. You just have to invest the right time and energy in it.
Absolutely. I actually
Um,
think that parallel is really interesting, Pranav, because it's actually the correlation is actually quite direct, right? So, with sort of like raising funding, when you go to a VC, they have a thesis. They have a thesis in what kinds of companies they want to invest in and why and what kinds of founders, right? Very similarly, reporters have a beat that they typically work on. So, in the comms world, right, they're covering an entire narrative. They're not just publishing funding rounds because you called and asked them to, right? Or their editor back from college a while ago. And so I think those two things feel really parallel. And then second, I think the hook is also really important. And I think you and I come from this marketing world, right? Where the first 6 seconds really is everything. How do you get someone's attention? And I think maybe in venture, it's like, what is your point of view on how you're going to change the world? Like this founder,
Yeah.
like, why am I going to be the person to change it? And I think that's very similar for reporters, right? Like, why do you want to cover my company? What is this really sharp, angulated point of view that's going to start conversation? And that's sort of like always been the point of media, right? Is to like inform and then begin a dialogue. And so figuring out how you can insert yourself and have strong opinions to start that dialogue. Yeah. So I think that's actually a great analogy.
Cool. All right. Okay. I'm going to pivot a little bit and talk about this this topic of brand and performance. This comes up all the time. That's the whole thesis of this podcast, is helping people understand that sometimes the line is actually quite blurry, and sometimes you actually need, we need to use those terms because they've become sort of commonplace in the industry. But when you think about the comms impact on the brand or the top line, what are some of the misconceptions that you see in the industry? What are the struggles that you see in the industry from your perspective? And then we can just have a discussion. Like, I can offer some thoughts from my perspective, but tell me what people get wrong and what people get right in terms of how to understand the impact of comms on the company.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really would love your perspective on this. I think we could use kind of a Pranav special on comms measurement,
Yeah.
which I would love for you to post more on LinkedIn about. But I think very specifically here, sort of like the outdated comms playbook, right? Used to be, hey, we have a marketing leader that owns narrative, and then we just have like a comms agency. It's a PR agency. We're going to throw 10 to 30K at them a month, depending on how much we care about this or how much we're in the press, and we're just going to let them work on placements. And then we're going to probably fire them in 3 months and hire someone else because they weren't good enough. And the way that these sort of like outdated agencies or even comms in house hires used to measure their own success is, hey, I put you on 5 podcasts and I got us mentioned in X amount of publications. And even though it was just a mention of our name, we're still in there and I'm going to count it. And it was this like quantitative volume game. And I think in comms, it's a little bit of the thinking is a little bit flipped around where quantitative isn't always the most like intuitive and natural measure of
Mm,
success. I think a lot of it is qualitative, which is why I think this is comms in itself has been sort of like a controversial topic within sort of Silicon Valley and marketing. I think when I think about qualitative measures of comms and what I would consider sort of like valuable measurement is sort of like landing the narrative. Is the reporter using the framing that you're using when you're describing your company? Is the reporter directly quoting you or are they paraphrasing you? Are they using you as a source in that they considered you to be an expert in the field and a valuable voice?
mm,
I think it's also other things like how do you really insert yourselves? Again, I used the word beat earlier, right? Within a reporter's beat. So as they're covering, how marketing technology and AI is evolving, how do you be a constant mention within a larger narrative? And then I think finally, like, how are you sort of mentioned alongside heavy hitters and category creators, if that's sort of your goal? Like, who are you mentioned alongside when they're sort of talking about this big narrative? And so, again, those things are uncomfortable because it's like, how are we really measuring them? But when they're working. And I think when I, even say the word anthropic and I say clay, you
yeah.
sort of are like, no, whatever they're doing is working. And you can't
Yeah.
really put your finger on it, but it's working. And yeah, I'd love to hear sort of like what you're seeing amongst your clients.
Yeah. It's a good, I sadly, I think most of our customers and a lot of the industry does not think about comms and PR in a strategic way like they used to maybe 10 or 15 years ago. And some of it I can appreciate why. There's like you said, the whole founder-led sort of motion. Influencer has come about
Mhm.
and taken over some of that sort of, mind space. Now, the way we think about all earned media, right? Whether that's organic social, whether that's, PR, whether that's, inbound coverage on podcasts or whatever. All of that to me is earned media. And the hardest part about this is most people aren't even tracking some of the quantitative measures.
Mhm.
So totally with you on the qual, right? You have to own the narrative, you have to shape the narrative, and doing that is a huge win. And you shouldn't think about measuring the impact of that. You're right, either CEO gets it or they don't. And so that's, unfortunate, but that is the reality. But from a quant perspective, once you start to lay out what is the reach of that earned media, how many impressions or reach are you getting with your organic social or, LinkedIn, Twitter, wherever you are. You need to be tracking it. How much reach are you getting through all of your PR work? And you should be tracking it. And there are tools for this, right? Like, what's the, I'm forgetting the name of the tool. Cision will do this.
I think
There's
Meltwater has a
one,
tool.
Meltwater does this. There's one other brand that I'm forgetting right now. We use it with one of our customers, and so we're able to actually see the impressions for all of that earned media, and that allows us to feed our marketing mix models
Mm,
to say that if you're getting this much reach from your paid media, you're getting this much reach from your earned media, and you're able to kind of equalize the playing field, level the playing field between the two, and at least have some directional sense of how much that PR and earned media is doing for your business. So
mhm,
that's what we do. We collect all that data from the historical time period. For some of the newer brands who are not doing PR, but they are doing a lot of organic social, we have their CEO's LinkedIn impression counts in the model,
mhm,
right? And we can see that when they go viral, when they spike, does that have a positive impact on their traffic, their leads, their
mhm,
signups, whatever it might be? And when they do less of it, does that have a correlation, which means those same metrics start to see a negative effect? So when you have a year or two of that history on every single sort of earned media, surface, you can start to make the relationships between how much of your business is being driven by that. And for some companies, and we are a case in point, we didn't do any advertising until like 6 months ago. All of it was earned media, right? Which was all sort of organic social, me getting invited on other people's podcasts, and so on and so forth. So I would say if you're serious about this, start tracking some of those metrics,
mhm,
organic social. If you're doing press, if you're doing AEO and GEO and whatever you want to call that, to me, like that stuff is very similar to earned media because there's a lot of, and I think you would agree with me, there's also lots of overlap now in what gets surfaced in LLMs and what earned media is, right? So all of the backlinks and the mentions are going to get you more coverage in LLMs than previously believed. So I think PR and comms is going to have a huge impact in the next like 3 to 4 years, and people are not paying attention to it in that way. Hey folks, thanks for listening to this podcast today. If you're enjoying the show and if you're getting value out of it, we'd really appreciate if you drop us a 5-star rating on your favorite podcasting app.
yeah, absolutely. And I'm even curious, you made a comment around, I hope this will change, but you said with 1 or 2 years of data and history on these, like the core, like it becomes really clear, like our models are able to. And I think even what I hear from some of my peers in the industry, I think this is different in sort of like the consumer or the established space where comms becomes much more important because you're dealing with a lot of inbound. You're getting mentioned or you're in a
Mhm.
crisis or whatever, like later stage, I think is fine. Earlier stage, I don't even know that agencies last a year or even like in-house comms
I
hires.
know.
Like they don't
Yeah.
even get hired until a lot later. And I think some of that is also really interesting and it becomes up to like I think that's sort of where I'm like, does your CEO get it or not? I remember having an older CEO from a previous company or a leader, and he sort of was criticizing the head of marketing, right? And he's like,
Mm.
this head of marketing is going on way too many podcasts and doing a bunch of personal brand stuff, and they should really be focused on the team more. And I remember wanting to scream and being like, do you not realize the work that this head of marketing
Uh,
is doing is quite literally part of the marketing machine? Like, they are doing the Lord's work by going in there, taking their personal brand. That's actually work that you should be doing. And so I think that is also like a really interesting like mindset shift that needs to happen. And I think some of these new strategies do come into play, like form optimization on Reddit, right? A huge driver of
mhm.
AEO and GEO. SEO has completely changed to encompass so many more channels than we previously thought. So what you're saying makes a ton of sense. But I'm curious, like, what do you see in startup land in terms of like hiring comms folks, retaining comms folks? Like,
Almost
yeah.
none. No, almost none, right? I don't think people make a comms hire until they are pre-IPO
Hmm.
and they're trying to hit the investor market, and that's when, like, comms becomes really important. There are some outliers, right? Like you said, if it's a consumer startup or, mass market type of audience, obviously, like, companies like OpenAI and Claude have tons of comms people for the right reasons. But I think an average startup doesn't think about it until they're ready to kind of hit that type of scale. It's very, very rare. There's some brands, like I was listening to the CEO of Kalshi, the prediction market people,
Yeah.
And he was talking about how they invested in brand, right, and marketing from the very beginning, in addition to investing in the product and the tech. And so again, it comes back to, does the CEO get it from the very beginning? Which, most, let's be honest, most tech startup founders are not very well versed or don't have a deep intuition on what is good in the field of marketing. And that hurts us as an
Mhm.
industry. And I'll also say, being a very sort of objective analyst of the marketing function, we don't do ourselves favors.
Mhm.
There's a lot of sort of, I would say, I'm doing this because it was the easiest job for me to find
Mhm.
type of thing. And it's structural in the industry. And what I mean by it's structural is marketing jobs are often the least paid in the if you compare it to sales, you compare it to CS, you compare it to
Yep.
product, right? And the barrier to entry is fairly low. And if you think about, because everyone thinks they can do marketing, I'm just saying it, right?
Mhm.
And by the way, I used to be one of those people because I'm not a marketer by training. I'm an engineer who became a
Mm.
marketer. And I was like, yeah, this is easy. I can do it. And I got my butt kicked once I
Yeah.
actually got in the job. And then the third piece is that most startup marketing leaders don't have a ton of experience
Mhm.
by definition. So you become like this, it's startup marketing becomes very cyclical in that sense that you don't have the right leadership. The CEO doesn't get it. The head of marketing probably this is their like first job. There's always exceptions, but I'm like talking about the average.
Yep.
There's a lot of marketing people applying for marketing jobs who may not have the full sort of expertise or the education. And these are often considered the lowest paying jobs in comparison to the other go to market functions. So it becomes hard now to break out of that cycle and do amazing marketing. How are you going to do it if you don't have the right leadership, the right talent, the right sort of incentive structure? And so there is a little bit of a crisis in the startup ecosystem. I think that changes very quickly the moment you are a $100 million business, $200 million
Mhm.
business, $500 million business, or if you're very well funded, tech startup and you can attract that type of next tier talent. And comms, that's the impact on comms, on paid media, on product marketing. All of that stuff doesn't show up in the startup tech circles. And that was a very pessimistic point of view, but I had to say it. Like
Now that you've
I
depressed
see
yourself.
that. But I'm also excited to see sort of the next generation of startup founders take a lot more interest in distribution because guess what? One thing that AI has done is the barrier to entry is so low that your distribution needs to be epic. And if you don't have that skill set from day one, you're not going to make it.
You're actually touching on something. I attended the OpenAI, sort of like the public town hall that Sam Altman led yesterday. He said he was referencing from his time at running Y Combinator that founders would come to him and they would say, I thought the hardest part of this would be building the technology. The hardest part is getting people to care about it. And he was sort of referencing that in terms of like how startup founders should really be thinking about going to market. And I think it is true in that one, it's never been easier to build software, like ever in the history of humanity. Second, it's also never been harder to stand out because the cost of words, we can quite literally manufacture them from thin air and publish them anywhere we want with the lowest barrier to entry. And so I do think like having this strong narrative and being able to place it in the market and getting people to care is incredibly important. And a CEO who gets that, I think that quite literally is like part of the job is being able to be that evangelist. I think the second piece that's coming to mind is you sort of talk through your like worldview on startup marketing is also that the gap between the B2B playbook and the B2C playbook is closing.
Mm.
I think part of the reason that I maybe even took a step back from just jumping into another, marketing role post Jasper was I was sort of looking around at that B2B market and thinking like I'm not really inspired here. Like I don't know that there's like a marketing team and a product I really want to get behind. Like I'm risk
Yeah.
averse now with my career that I've built up enough sort of like reputation and equity in my own career where I want to be really picky and choosy about who I want to work with. And I think part of what I've learned is some of the companies in the enterprise space that are doing the best marketing are pulling from this like consumer playbook. When I say that is
Mm.
you're never going to see like a luxury handbag company come up with like a sloppy, like low budget ad with creative, right? They just are never going to do that. You're never going to see that in the luxury consumer business. But a piece of technology that costs $100 to $500,000 a year, will put out the lowest budget ad possible and just spend a bunch on billboards before Dreamforce and call it a day in terms of like brand and creative and ad campaigns. And so I think the switch also to like high
Mm.
effort marketing, really thoughtful marketing, really taking one campaign, and again with the tennis terminology, right? Like finishing your swing is becoming so, so important here.
Yeah, I'm totally with you. Okay, I want to pivot the conversation a little bit to the tactical advice on defining the AI narrative at a company. And maybe we can do this real time and use Paramark as an example, right? If you go to the Paramark website, we don't talk about AI, we don't talk about agents. We use the words that our customers use, and that's been something that we have done from the very beginning. We use a lot of ML, we use a lot of data science, we use a lot of sophisticated sort of math models to do the work that we do, but we've stayed away from using the word AI because of, in my opinion, there's a lot of danger there if you don't use it properly. And it's also kind of related to our product because I think when people hear the word AI or the term AI, they think of generative AI, right? AI is a very broad thing, right? Robots are AI, computer vision is AI, self-driving is AI, right? All of these things are AI, but like when you hear it in the marketing context, it's about generating words and it's generating images and it's generating video. But so let's if you were advising Paramark to think about, and listen, we have a huge AI roadmap. There's a whole bunch of agentic stuff that's coming, but I want to be very careful about how we present it to the external world. So, what are the steps that I should take or any other startup founder should take in shaping the AI narrative for the next couple of years?
Yeah, I think my take right now, this is an evolving, I always say that like my philosophy is evolving. And I would say right now, where my philosophy is sitting pretty firmly, is that you're really only able to talk to one primary audience and one secondary audience at a time. Doesn't mean you can't have messaging for all of them, but you're really only going to be able to shift the needle on one audience at a time. And so I think really figuring out in the next, let's say 3 months, Pranav, if you're gearing up for a new funding round, are you trying to speak to investors? Are you trying to speak to customers right now and getting them to have some sort of shift in behavior? Are you trying to speak to AI engineers and getting them to come on board so that you can build this incredible AI roadmap you have, which you couldn't without the talent that's going to be attracted to working for you? So I think really actually the first step is figuring out which audience it is that you really want to hone in on for
Mm,
the next few months and being okay with the trade off because you're not going to be able to hit them all. And I think the second piece is getting really specific on what is the behavior that you want to shift within said audience. So
mm.
with consumer, and I think that's getting really specific, which scares a lot of people because it's like, wait, I want to do a ton of things. I don't want to just shift their behavior on one thing. I just want them to I want to get them to buy the product. And I think buying the product is sort of like the downstream impact of landing the narrative. And so maybe what we're trying to get them to do is switch over from a competitor. So that's a very different comm strategy than, say, create a line item in their budget for a software they never knew existed. That whole category
Mm.
creation play, that's a different comm strategy than switching over from a competitor. Don't do both at once, right? So I'm even going to bring in the Jasper example. For the first pivot of the enterprise, right? A lot of it was, what is this? How are CMOs going to trust this? Is there an indemnity clause? Are we going to get sued for this content? We are seeing companies go down left, right, and center for using AI content. So that whole narrative was around security. And then soon after, it was whack-a-mole with the amount of tools that you can use. So why would they want to use, the enterprise tool we were selling? So the narrative shifted to it's not about faster outputs, it's about better outcomes. So all of a
Mm.
sudden, we don't want you to measure 7 tools and say, I'm going to pick that one. And then in 3 months, I'm going to pick that one. It's about better outcomes and building an entire strategy that's different. So again, I'm sorry, I'm shifting away from Paramark here, but I think
No,
it's
no, that's good. Yeah.
what is the very specific behavior shift? And then I think you do the part where it comes to the channels and the tactics and who's the right person to go to market. I think often, I love that you were a marketer by trade before you became the CEO to a marketing technology company. I find that like even as a consultant, right? I feel so much conviction in a CEO that is the ICP of the technology they're selling into that community. I don't know if you feel it, but I think even working in marketing technology, I think CEOs like understand there's a lot of money to be made in marketing. I'm not sure that CEOs respect marketers in the way
Correct.
that they claim to, right?
Yep.
In a way that makes sense. So again, like kind of figuring out the channels and the tactics comes after this like very heavy work of like who is your consumer and what behavior do you want to shift?
All right, I like that. I like that. And the most important thing that you said was the be okay with the trade-offs, right? Are
Hmm.
you appealing to the engineers? Are you appealing to the customers? Are you appealing to the VCs at that time? And everything around your comms is going to be geared towards that. So, and you can't do all of them at the same time. It's just going to be way too confusing. The words you choose, and we put up a bunch of job descriptions at the beginning of this month for a new bunch of hiring that we're doing, and the words that I put in the job description were meant for engineers and what
Hmm.
they are going to get. Engineers versus marketers versus salespeople will have different sort of language that they're going to react to. So that was a little fun, real example. Okay, what is one thing that you believed about AI a year ago that you no longer think is true?
Okay. I don't think this one's going to be revolutionary, but I think I believed enterprise adoption would be a lot faster than what it is. I thought that when
Mm.
I personally experienced the tool because I was so early to using AI for marketing, right? And I saw the magic of it so early. I think I'm also a writer by trade, so I care a lot about my writing and I put a lot of emphasis on what I choose to publish. I just thought it would be like wildfire and people would want to adopt these tools across the enterprise and it would become, I thought like horizontal plays would be a lot more like I thought we'd have like a supercharged AI work assistant by now, right? A couple years later. And I think it's a bit silly now, a couple years into it, thinking like we feel so far away from that. It feels like we still are in a very fragmented enterprise landscape where we are using bits and pieces for everything. One of the first companies I worked at that I helped take to IPO was a company called WalkMe. The entire premise of this company that went public, right, was digital adoption. Humans can't use your Salesforce correctly, your Workday, your HR platforms. We are going to overlay something on top to help you walk you through it. Really simple concept. Felt kind of obvious, right? All of it was about human psychology and workplace dexterity, and humans don't want to use this new technology all the time. It's all around like this new SaaS landscape. Actually, nothing has changed since that time where I spent every day and night living and breathing humans' relationship with technology at work. It's just been so interesting to me, and I'm like, "Wow, I really overestimated our ability culturally to sort of take something new and shift with it." So I'm curious
I,
about yours, but that was mine, and I feel a bit silly now
That's a good one. No, no, no. I think you're 100% right. And as you were saying this, I was thinking about we had an internal Slack conversation yesterday. My co-founder, myself, and our people person, and we were talking about using this ATS. We opened all these
thinking.
jobs, and I'm like, hey, I'm not really sure how to use this to set up the interviews properly, and like, I don't want to get it wrong because blah blah blah. Like, yeah, we're gonna set up a time and walk through it step by step, and we're gonna record it so that everyone can do it on their end. And you're like, yeah, that is the age of AI. Like, we haven't made that much progress, let's be honest, about the end to end workflows aren't there
Mhm,
yet because of just how complicated these workflows are and how specific they are to each individual team
mhm,
and preferences. So, for some things it works great. Don't get me wrong, love Claude, love GPT and Gemini, but like you said, I go to Gemini when I have to use Nano Banana to make a quick edit to an image, and
mhm,
I go to Claude for my Excel work, and I go to GPT because I've built some custom GPTs that just do the job. And it's like it's super fragmented. So it's such an interesting time that we live in. Okay, one thing that I'm very curious about. So you decided after Jasper to kind of take a different approach in your career, and I've
mhm,
seen hundreds of people that I respect go down the fractional route over the last couple of years in the marketing world. Right? There's like the fractional CMO, the fractional comms person, the fractional head of growth. There's a huge booming economy and supply of these talented individuals. Do you think that is structural or do you think that is point in time?
It's interesting. I want to speak for myself here instead of the whole industry because I feel like a large majority of my network is actually in house roles. And I think I'm sort of like the outlier in terms of taking this approach to my career. So I'm happy you know so many people. Please introduce me so I don't feel like such an alien. I think for me, I wanted to be let me start by saying this. I genuinely thought consultants were people that couldn't get a job, and they were trying to just make their LinkedIn look really nice until they landed another job. That is my genuine belief when I worked in house. And I think once I left my role and started poking around and having different coffee chats, I was really lucky to come out of that role with a really strong network. And these executives had gone on, right, in this like age of everybody has their own AI startup to found their own thing or to really partner in different areas. So as I started poking around for which company do I want to join next, which executive do I want to work with next, I sort of said like, wait, I don't have to pick. And also like, I'm not sure about your product. I don't know if your product is going to make it. I don't want to bet my career. So I think I started to get really specific around I don't want to tie my future to a company where I can't control where that product is going to go or exactly how they're going to go to market. And I'd rather control my own destiny. I think I just became a little more risk averse in that way. And in other ways, I
Mm,
took a lot of risk from the traditional job market of like putting it all on myself. And now it's up to me to get business. So I'd say that's the first piece. The second piece is I started out in my career also untraditional. I was a product marketer. And I don't know if you remember what marketing was like. I'm sure you did in kind of 2018. This was me being pretty fresh into the marketing world.
sure.
Everyone was like, it's product marketing or growth. Don't pick comms, don't pick brand, don't pick
Yeah.
any of these other silly things. You want to be CMO, it's these two real marketing functions. The rest is fluff. And I sort of raised my hand for all the comms stuff because it was so fun. I got to work on this IPO. All of a sudden at Jasper, comms became one of the biggest challenges to do. So I started off being a generalist, and I think I started specializing almost 10 years into my career, which is very different than what most marketing leaders do. So now that I was able to pick what specialty I really liked, what I spiked at, what I was very best at, I still feel like a bit of a generalist in terms of like what category, what industry, what size of company, which style of CMO, which style of CEO. So now I get to
Mm,
be a generalist again there. But I think what I will say for anyone listening and kind of at a career pivot, consulting is an incredibly strategic way to fill gaps in your resume to get from where you were to where you need to go. The dating app I was talking about, right? Like an incredible brand, publicly
mm,
listed company. I'm not going to go from the head of marketing and comms at a small Silicon Valley startup to leading comms there. But because I'm able to build a bridge with my consumer and AI experience, all of a sudden it makes perfect sense why I would come in and consult there. And now having this portfolio of experience will help me land my next gig. So I have no idea what I'm doing, but this feels right to me. And I think in this age of AI and with so many things changing and the media landscape changing and people being out of work and teams getting really lean, I wanted to build that security in myself. So for all of those reasons, that is why I'm doing what I'm doing.
cool. You know what's really cool about what I've seen the last couple of years is there is a market. Like I see startup founders and heads of marketing and sales be like, "Hey, I need somebody with this like very specific experience." And now there is that supply out there where you can tap into that experience. So I think it's a net very positive move for the industry to have these many talented people out there. And you're doing a great job, so keep it up. One last question before we wrap
Yes.
this up. And that is, we ask this question to everybody. What is one experiment that you would want to run if you had no constraints on anything, right? So unlimited budget, unlimited, like really no constraints. What is the one experiment that you would like to run in the field of marketing?
That's a good question. I feel like it would be, I think, an experiment that I'd like to run that I'm really curious about is how much a founder sort of being canceled ties into kind of like the larger company strategy. I've been noticing, I think from the outside, when I first started this career in comms, like being canceled, getting negative press was one of the scariest things you could think about. It was very
Mm,
defensive. It was very focused on risk reduction or crisis mitigation. The whole layoff thing, the Black Lives Matter movement around CEOs coming out and making a stance. And I think what I'm seeing now is I'm seeing CEOs that are taking these really controversial opinions or these really like personal opinions and taking them and putting them on X and almost being representative of their whole company and saying like, if you don't like it, like cancel me, right? And I think Silicon Valley's always had a little bit of that, like a little bit of that rebellious nature to it. But I think I would just be really curious to like take one of your models, Pranav, and test it on a couple of different founders that have been canceled or gone through these crises and figured out like how does it actually impact things? And I think it would inform me a lot on crisis and reputation management and how much founders need to be unfiltered versus like take their personal or political opinions and sort of like go forth and prosper and deal with the consequences.
Oh my god. The immediate person that I thought of when you said this was Elon. I'm like, maybe we could just study Elon's last 10 years and maybe we can figure out no more comments on Elon. But that's a good one. I like it. I like it. All right, Samyutha, this was fantastic. Do you write online? How do people get in touch? Who do you want to work with? Like, tell me a little bit about just how do people help you? How do we help you?
Yeah, so my target list for 2026 is to work with the applications that I actually use, know, and love. So, this dating app I keep referencing, I actually met my partner on the dating app. And so, I think I
Nice.
have the luxury now of saying these are the tools that I want to help tell their story and I want to be a part of it. You can find me on Substack. I write there. I also would love to work with Substack. You can find me on LinkedIn. I publish often there. And in general, I think I'm in this phase where I feel really explorative. I want to work with really smart people and help tell their stories. And so, if any of this conversation resonated with you, please do reach out.
There we go, folks. Go check out Samyutha on Substack. I will do the same, and we'll maybe do this again in a few months when maybe AGI is here by then. We'll see.
I would love
Um,
that.
Thanks so much for coming on, Samyutha.
Thanks, Pranav.
All right, folks, that was Samyutha Reddy. You can find her on Substack. Go subscribe to her. She has really sharp takes on everything comms, AI, PR, and how all of this is changing in the next couple of years. And tune in again next week for another great episode.